before I get into reading a couple of these clips for you, I'd like by the show of hands, anybody who's ever had a job and worked for a really lousy boss, put your hand up. That's quite a few. Okay, now keep your hand up if this boss was also kind of a control freak. All right. Now, I'm also curious if this boss was somebody, when you did something wrong, blamed you or blamed somebody else around you. Does that sound familiar? And if you caught them where they were actually at fault, and it was very clear they would take two other things. They would mix excuse with blame. So they make an excuse as to why it happened and blame you, that if you had done your job to begin with, this wouldn't have happened over here. Does that sound familiar? And then when the evident truths become so abundantly clear that they have some issues to do, the last one they rely on is denial. So a really interesting thing in my interviews in my studio, I listen for two types of leaders when they come into my studio. I'm listening for a I type owner, and I'm listening for a we type owner. So let me give you really a short acronym that relates to a I type owner. An I type owner is the blame, excuses, denial. The acronym for it is BED. So every one of us as human beings, we fall into that. We'll blame other people, make excuses, and be in denial. Well, on the flip side of that are the owners who are the we type people, and they have a completely different acronym for them. It's OR, O-A-R, like the or where you or your vote. And it's ownership, accountability, responsibility. It's very different what happens when situations come up in their organization. So, a lot of really interesting things that I shared in this book, but the really central message that's in the book is that the best you can do. What do you think is the #1 obstacle for 80% of the business owners that are out there? What do you think it is? Anybody have a clue?
Themselves.
If I have a mirror, I put it in front of that business owner, and they discover what their #1 obstacle is to their own success. What I have observed out of business people that I have talked to is that the problems, the struggles, the challenges they have nothing to do with credit or financing or not getting good people or bad market or bad economy or bad whatever. It's a bad owner. And they don't like what they get, and every single morning they have to look in the back of the bathroom mirror and look at this person they hate working for. And unfortunately, some of you were working for that person, so if you were wondering, was it me or that boss? You heard a lot of blame, excuses, denial come out. Believe me, it was definitely the boss. So, one of my stories that I shared in here, there's a lot of really interesting things that came out of my experiences over the years, and some of them are personal experiences. And I want to share with you one of them that comes out of the chapter of the book titled, What's the Twist in Your Wire? So I'll share that with you now. And if it sounds, they say when you public speak that you really should read to people, and if it sounds like I'm reading here tonight, I actually am. Perhaps the idea for this exercise was born from people asking each other how they're wired. I can't be sure. What I do know is that a lot can be learned at a camp with several people sitting around twisting up old wires. Some get some tissues handy for what happens. Have you ever wondered why our kids are so close to their friends? Have you noticed how much closer that relationship gets if they have frequent pajama parties? Interesting, isn't it? But it's not surprising. We expected it to happen. After all, they're taking the time to get to know each other, and they're taking quality time away from other distractions to do it. It seems logical, so why not have a pajama party at work? That would be corny, and you'd upset the spouses of everyone you work with. So no, the pajama party is out, but the idea of spending quality time with your people away from all the distractions of the job is a great idea. And how do you do this? So years ago, I was part of an organization that was having a lot of challenges in the management staff. There was backbiting, rumors, people running to the boss. We had it all. For some of you, that sounds a little familiar. I was new to the team, so it put me in an awkward position. People shared their dislikes and wanted me to take sides. I was relieved when top management decided to hire a guru. His first move was to suggest a company outing. Now, this wasn't a company picnic. It was a camp specifically designed to help people understand the value of their team members. No obstacle we faced that day could have been solved by any one of us alone. There were many great learning experiences that day, but let me share with you some of the surprises. Our group of 10 people had to get through an electric web. Of course, power was not surging through those ropes and wires, but we couldn't touch anything. The rules were that if you did, you were dead. Now this was a big web that was set up with about 3-foot square holes in it, but the ones below 3 feet were maybe 8 inches by 3 inches, so there, or 3 feet rather, so there's no way to get through those. You could only do it at about waist height and above. So the top managers, Josh, Doug, Martin, and Bob, they gathered around in front of the woven net, trying to figure out how people could get through it. It was a series of horizontal and vertical ropes forming squares. The squares close to the top were very small. Nobody would get through them. The squares at the bottom were too small to get through. A person could go through those in the middle, but only head first or feet first in a more horizontal position. The first challenge was getting at least one person on the other side, because without them, there's no way to support anyone's body once they inserted them through the net. The rest of us stood back and smiled. This was an interesting group of leaders in front of us. Josh was the lead supervisor of the plant. He had been promoted to management because he had been around for several years. They had made him one of the big dogs by default. He was decent enough, but not really leadership material. He frequently came to work crabby and often made people do disgusting tasks that he would never consider doing himself, like blowing glass dust out of the grinders when they got plugged. No human being should have ever been subjected to that, but instead of spending money on new filters, Josh thought it was fine to take some of the peons out and have them take care of it. He must have thought of his underlings as disposable, a cardinal sin in leadership. Doug, on the other hand, was a plant manager. He had a degree in psychology. He not only thought he could read people's minds, but he figured he was smarter than anyone else too. He encouraged much of the backbiting and rumors by having private meetings with individual members of his staff on a regular basis. He seemed to love the soap opera that it created. His appearance was also interesting. He wore his hair long in the back, was balding on top, giving him an incredibly high hairline in front. I used to joke to others that his hairdo had just slid off the back. If you reached up and gave it a good tug and yanked it forward, everything would look about right. Doug was also very tacky and unprofessional. He thought it was funny to interview cute girls for receptionist jobs, after which he would walk out of the back office presenting the zip of his pants and commenting, "Well, that one went good." No, I'm not exaggerating. People gave the obligatory laugh, but some of us thought that he was very classless. Martin was the production manager, a good old boy by his own intentions. He loved his own ideas, his own space, and took credit for anything that seemed to have a good result in the plant. Everything else he took people to task for. He described his rude and unprofessional communications with others as being boldly honest, and smiled when he said it as though it was a good thing. He disappeared for a week while having a business trip to New Orleans during Mardi Gras, and I think many had secretly hoped he would never return. Martin was a bully by many standards, and he seemed to enjoy his intimidation of others. Bob was the last of the group. He was the head of engineering. His constant habit of interrupting other people during a conversation or anything you might have been doing was very annoying. He also threw some strange ideas out during problem-solving meetings or staff meetings. He never seemed to consider the needs of others when he did things. He never talked about his family or life outside of work, and nobody really knew him. He was just very annoying and the brunt of many jokes made behind his back. This group of 4 fairly disliked leaders was standing there puzzling and musing over how to solve this big mystery of getting through the net. But every idea thrown out by the others was being shot down by Bob. "We have to get someone on the other side for that to work," he kept saying. The clock was ticking. Frustrations were ramping up. Suddenly a voice rings out a short distance from them. It's Jeff. He's the young guy in the management team. He had been promoted to midnight shift supervisor because it was a job nobody else wanted. Jeff enjoyed playing softball all day long anyways, and the midnight shift worked out well. "Move aside, guys," he yells. "I'll show you how this is done." The managers were confused, but they moved to one side, creating a sort of aisle for Jeff to pass through. It was clear the managers were looking for an explanation for his unwanted outburst, but he didn't offer one. Instead, the second they parted away from the front of that tangled web of wires and rope, Jeff came on a dead run. As he got close, he leaped high in the air and dove through that net, leaving it undisturbed, just like an outfielder going after a line drive. "What? You didn't touch?" The bosses were startled and confused. How did he get over there? This is what they'd been trying to solve for nearly 20 minutes now, and this young pup had gone and done it his way. If those guys had been old enough, I'm sure 4 pairs of dentures would have been laying in the grass because their jaws were dropped to their knees. There stood Jeff on the other side of the net with a big sheepish grin on his face. You wanted somebody on the other side, didn't you? Start handing people through, guys, he said very cheerfully. It was priceless. The rest of the maze went quite quickly with Jeff on the other side. What interested me is that he saw what they couldn't, and they never would have given him a chance. He was the young guy. He had been dismissed. Wasn't the big 4 supposed to solve the problems and everyone else just did what they told them to do? That's how things had worked out in the past, and now somebody had broken the rules. Do you think that might change in the future? At a minimum, somebody looked at Jeff differently after that. I think that's possible. One obstacle after another was negotiated that afternoon, and many surprises like this one came throughout the day. As the evening drew near, we retreated to one of the lodges for some indoor exercises. The first one was the wire story, which this chapter is named after. Everyone was given a 24-inch piece of flexible wire. We were told to bend it however we wanted to represent our life. Good was up, bad was down, etc. We sat down in individual corners of private spaces to ponder how our wire would look for us. When the time came, our camp counselor called us to a meeting room where we sat in a big round circle on the floor. He then explained that he would like to have us share a little of our wire story so others could get to know us better. The story started with Curtis. I honestly have no idea what he said. It was pretentious, disingenuous, and insincere. You would have thought his life was a bed of roses minus the thorns. As it went around the circle, a few people shared things I wouldn't have guessed would be true about them, and I found it to be interesting. But then it was Bob's turn. The head of engineering, the butt of all office jokes, the nerd everyone seemed to dislike, the constant interrupter, the all-around moron. I noticed right away that Bob's wire had been crumpled into multiple zigzags up and down like he was trying to stitch a football with. Bob's story started out by him telling us about growing up with his parents, brothers, and sister. He also had a twin brother. We couldn't imagine the world with 2 Bobs running around. Unthinkable, right? Then he went to talk about his wife and kids and how proud he was of all of them. This was interesting because he had never said anything about them before. There was no pictures on his desk, no evidence. Perhaps it was simply we had never asked. Nobody wanted to know Bob. Bob got to a place where the wire was bent down. He started talking about the day he had arrived home after work and was getting ready for his boys to come home after a school event. It started getting late and no boys came. Bob paused and started to cry. His boys never did come home. They had been killed in a tragic accident that afternoon, 15 and 17 years old, run down by a drunk driver. Nobody knew what to say. After a few moments, Bob went on. We noticed his wire turned back up again, and we were all very relieved. He and his wife had gotten involved in groups to deal with their grief, and now were heavily involved in community volunteering. That is, until the fall of the following year. Stress isn't good for anyone, and Bob's wife had taken a big hit with the loss of his boys. She was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer and died just before Christmas. Many of us quietly wiped away the stinging tears that trickled down our faces as Bob explained how hard that Christmas was. I was feeling shallow for having told a joke or two behind Bob's back since I had joined the team. Bob wasn't done. His twin brother Mike came to his rescue. They had done so much together in their lives and were even randomly connected that they had married 2 girls who lived in the same city and from another state. Bob explained how valuable it was to have family you could count on, and how he didn't think you could have survived without Mike there to help. Bob's wire had a long upturn, and we enjoyed listening to how things got better. We were relieved that things had worked out okay. But there was one last bend on that wire that went down. What was that, we wondered? Bob and Mike had planned a fishing trip to Canada. After all, they had gone through together over the last few years. Mike thought it was a good idea to get away for a fishing trip together. Bob was excited and had done a lot of planning and shopping getting ready for that one big trip. Bob was on his way for one last trip to Cabela's when his phone rang. It was his sister-in-law, Carmen. Bob, she inquired. Yeah, it's me, he said. You sound like you're driving. Can you pull over? Bob pulled over. A long silence filled the room as Bob once again openly wept before all of us. We didn't know what the news was, but a lot of what had happened in Bob's life up to this point wasn't good. Mike had a heart attack this afternoon, Bob. She sobbed on the other end of the line. Your brother has gone to heaven. We sat silently for some time, waiting for Bob. He still had some wire left, and we were all relieved that it now went up. As we dried our eyes and waited, Bob started to speak with a broken voice. The rest of all of this wire is you guys. I love you for all you've done for me, despite my clumsiness, being crafty from time to time. You guys laugh and joke with me to help keep my spirits up. You've all been so wonderful to work with, and I couldn't ask for better coworkers than any of you. Thanks for always being there for me. We sat there stunned. Everyone knew they had not been there for Bob. We also knew that we would definitely be there for Bob in the future. Bob had stunned everyone in the room that evening. He became human to us, and you could sense a growing warmth for Bob that never existed before. You never know the cross someone else carries, and it shapes who they are today. If you have a Bob in your workplace, have you been privately making fun of him or her behind their back? If you have, is that the best you can do? No, it isn't. Take the person out for lunch instead of making fun of them, and you might learn that there's a whole new person waiting for you to discover. You might even learn something about yourself when you go down that road, because that kind of experience could be a lifesaver for you in the future. I'm thankful that I learned from experiences like this. I learned that it always pays to take the time to get to know people, even the so-called bad apples. I've also come to realize how important it is to embrace the differences that people have and value the various views and ideas they bring to the team. 2 brains are always better than 1, and 10 are always better than 2. If ideas come from different perspectives, just think about how much you can learn from any given situation with diversity. If you find yourself being able to be tolerant of others and their differences, if you can be polite and respectful to anyone you work with or spend time around, regardless of who they are and what they say and do, no matter how different they are from you, is that the best you can do? Well, it's definitely a step in the right direction. The next time you're having team issues at work, think about taking the group out for a zipline adventure instead of adding to the problem with gossip, private meetings, rumors, and jokes behind people's backs. You'll be surprised what you learn when you get away from the stresses of work. Thank you.